What's the most significant you just faked with the wrong person moment you've witnessed or experienced? I work in a law office and regularly have to go file documents with the court. I have learned, from watching one interaction, not to fuck with the clerks at the filing window. Point. A lot of people probably don't know / wouldn't believe how detailed the rules are for submitting documents to the court. There are rules regarding the type of paper you can use, the exact spacing of the heading on the paper, the exact measurements of the 2-hole punches at the top of the paper, etc. There are literally dozens of rules on how to format your filings. In my experience, these rules are rarely enforced. The clerks will reject documents if there are major errors, missing signatures, incorrectly filled out, etc. but will usually let things slide like your 2-hole punches not being precisely 2 3/4 inches apart. But there was one day where I saw a clerk take sweet revenge against someone who totally had it coming. I was standing in line, waiting to file something, and a notoriously huge prick of an attorney got called up to the window. The clerk asked him something, like, "I'm really sorry Mr. Notoriously huge prick, but you're missing some attachment to this form." He reacted as if she had just stood from her chair, flipped him the bird, and went to sheet on his mother's grave. He starts yelling about how she didn't know what the fuck she was doing, a trained ape could do her job, he would be complaining to her supervisor, and on and on. He goes stomping away, and she looks much calmer than you would expect for someone who just got reamed out by this enormous douchebag. I get called up to her window and say something like, "I'm so sorry you had to deal with that." She replies, "It's fine, he's on my list now." I'm curious, so I ask what she means. Her response was fantastic. She says, "Mr. Notoriously huge prick handles a lot of family law cases. He'll be wanting to file things here, and his paperwork is bound to land on my desk. For people like him, I get out the formatting sections of the rules of court, and I make sure he's followed every one of them." She points to my filing and says, "Your 2-hole punches look off. You see how one is higher than the other? They are supposed to be a certain distance from the top of the page. I'm not going to reject yours, but next time he drops something off at the filing box, you better believe I'm going to bust out my ruler." I say how awesome that is, but once he sees the reason his document was rejected, he'll just have an assistant fix it, or whatever. She replies, "We don't have to tell him why it was rejected specifically, just that it violated some rule of formatting. He can figure that out for himself if he ever wants to have another document filed." She looked so happy. I lost it at a subway a while back. This story isn't about me losing it at a person myself, but I found someone who could, and did. The subway I go to is inside a skating rink, and on this day it was flooded with newly pubescent boys thinking that treating people like absolute horseshit is how you act like a macho man. One girl behind the counter was near tears, and the other woman was trying to hold her own ground against a bunch of 13-year-olds. It was you faking beach. I didn't faking ask for mayo. Are you blind? For fact's sake, that's not toasted enough. When I get a job, I'm gonna be making more than you. Just a taste of some of what I heard. So I went out to the lobby of the skating rink, found a woman nearby, and asked her if she was with the boys in subway, which she was, and then I told her to follow me. The look on the boys' faces when she let out her angered screech after listening to them was friggin' priceless. She made the boys pay for their own food. One boy didn't get to finish making his sandwich. Wrap it up how it is, and he'll pay for it. And from what I gathered as she practically dragged them out of there was the boys who weren't hers. She was going to speak to their parents, followed by strong protests as she told them to pack their crap. As she was taking them home early. I left the girls at Subway a nice tip, and they gave me a cookie. Never fuck with an angry mom. Edit. Thanks for the gold, kind stranger. I've made some edits to better the grammar. This is why you don't read it when you're tired. Was tending bar at a dive when I was in college, and this guy Dave came in every day, had 2 beers and left. He was a pretty quiet guy and basically just kept to himself. He wasn't particularly big, but he wasn't small either. One day 2 rednecks came in right after we opened and started pounding beers. When Dave came in, they smarted off to him as he walked by, but he ignored them. I poured his first beer and told the guys to leave him alone. They didn't. Just being total dicks. I told them I was closing their tab and they had to go. As far as they were concerned, Dave was the reason they were getting kicked out. One of the rednecks stood up and proceeded to tell Dave that he would kick his ass for being such a bussy. He responded with, "I've done enough fighting in my life." The way he said it was cold. Dave had obviously seen some shit. All of a sudden the redneck sucker punched Dave in the side of the head while he was still sitting in the bar stool. Dave casually stood up and started taking his coat off, and the redneck hit him square in the cheek. It was a full-blown knock to the jaw. Dave did not even flinch. The other redneck that was still seated said, "Damn, not like damn oh you got hit." It was more like, "Damn, Leroy I outdone faked up." Dave calmly finished taking his jacket off, placed it on the back of the chair, and the redneck went to throw another punch. Dave caught the blow with his hand, grabbed the redneck by the face like he was palming a basketball, and in one fell swoop slammed his head against the side of the bar. Dave then dragged him through the bar, still by his face, and carried him out the back and threw him in the dumpster, again, still by his face. When Dave came back in, he started over to the other mouthy redneck, who at this point was making a run for the door, and Dave kicked him in the middle of the back, bending his entire body backwards into the shape of C. The sheer momentum of the kick ended up slamming him face first into big wooden door that only opened inward. The dude stood up, and it looked as though his face had faking exploded. Dave came back over, calmly apologized and said he was just glad he didn't kill them. I totally believed he meant that. Said he wouldn't come back as not to cause any more trouble, and I made absolutely sure he knew he was 100% good in my book. Dave never paid for another beer as long as I worked there. I live in a college town where a certain population is rich, out-of-state kids who come here for the skiing and legal pot. One night, around 1 AM, I was leaving the bars and saw one such gentleman. He was dressed in standard "my dad is a lawyer and will sue you" clothes, pastel button down, backwards hat, khaki shorts, and Sperry's. He was also very drunk. He was being a general inebriated nuisance as he walked towards his car. He walked into a middle-aged, slightly pudgy guy wearing jeans and a black shirt. The young guy started throwing obscenities at the middle-aged guy, just being an ass. As the young guy turned to get into his brand new Audi A4, the older gentleman said, "You aren't planning on driving, are you?" Young guy stopped, collected his thoughts, and then turned to sass the older gentleman. "I drive better drunk while getting head than you ever could." The old guy said something about he would recommend not doing that, and young guy shouted back. By this point, young guy is screaming, and through the drink he was carrying. At this time, I realized that there were a couple other guys with the old guy, also nondescript, also bald, also wearing jeans. You know, kinda would look good in aviators. Kinda got mustaches. Kinda got that cop feel to them. So then, as the young guy throws his drink and hits one of them, one of the plainclothes police officers pulls out his taser and tases the shit out of the young guy. I mean, more than is necessary. He goes down, screaming, while his brothers and prostitute girlfriend watch. His buddies consider getting involved, then back off. When the police identify themselves, remember how he was wearing khakis? Yep, big brown patch in the middle when he got arrested. So good. TLDR, watched some snobby rich white boy pick a fight with a plainclothes policeman and then shoot himself after getting tased. While working as a bouncer, I saw these two guys start to harass a buddy of mine. I didn't do anything because I knew who he was, but they didn't. He and I grew up in the same martial arts classes. We were both involved in football and wrestling. He is a Marine. He, however, doesn't look it. He is about 5'9" and tall, toned but nowhere near bulky, and a very kind looking fellow. The two guys were mocking him for wearing sandals. He blew them off and kept talking to his other friends. One of the pair got really close to him and knocked his hat off my friend's head. My friend turned to them and politely told them, "Hey, I get it. You two are tough and hate my sandals. Please just leave me alone. I'm just trying to have a good night. Also, don't touch me or my belongings." As he reached down to pick up his hat, the guy kicked it away and tried to push him over. That's when the fun started. My buddy grabbed the guy by his knees and introduced the jerk to the ground. My buddy bounced back and barked at them to stop. The other guy rushed him and proceeded to make out with my buddy's knee. The first guy went to get up and shook hands with my buddy's fist. At this point, I waltz over. I grab the second guy by the back of his pants and drag him outside. He is whimpering in pain, complaining that his nose might be broken. I set him down and go to retrieve the other idiot. Upon returning, my buddy has the guy's arm behind his back. He passes them all into me and I toss him out. The cops are called and everything gets handled. Idiot 2 had a broken nose and idiot 1 had a bag of coke in his pocket. One went to the emergency room and the other to jail. I walked my buddy back inside and bought him a beer. The whole time, people are staring in amazement due to the fact that my little buddy took down 2 bigger guys in a few seconds. I thought it was hilarious. TLDR 2 drunk idiots picked a fight with my short marine buddy. One got a broken nose and the other went to jail for cocaine. My mom was a teacher in Pittsburgh in the 60s and tells a bunch of stories about how she was a clueless country girl. It was a very tough inner city school and she got a lot of crap from the kids who chewed up and spat out the do-gooder white chicks every year. Then, one day, she leaves the apartment line usual, stops at the diner for coffee, says hi to the newspaper stand dude, gives the homeless guy on the corner a cigarette and a light, walks into school, and the kids are sitting and quiet and oh so very compliant. This is good, but strange point she doesn't find out for a couple of weeks, and only because another teacher clued her in. One of the kids saw her walking either home or to school, and word spread. That homeless dude on the corner is apparently a mob boss or someone quite high in the organization, and the kids think that she's actually friends with him and that he would, know if she was having a bad day. A couple months later, she cemented her reputation for getting in this big kid's face, confiscating his toy, and doing the whole march him out the door by his ear bit. Again, my mom is clueless, and this kid was the 60s equivalent of a gang banger, and the toy was actually a real gun. However, the kids think she knew and didn't care because she has balls of steel. In addition to her mob connections, I'm told she didn't have many bad days for the rest of the school year. My dad ended up going to England for a postdoc a couple years later, partly to avoid the war, I would guess, so she stopped teaching. TLDR don't mess with my mom, because she entirely blind to danger. The one and only time I have had a massive win over someone falls into this category. I was once engaged to the Vice Consul of America from Brazil. I was flying around on holiday and coming back to America, where we were living. I was on a working visa, but had recently quit my job as we were about to move. She was being reposted, and so I decided to go holiday for a few weeks, and had come in and out of the US several times. After being in a plane returning from Spain, I was dressed in a rolled pair of shorts, t-shirt, odd socks and hadn't slept. I looked and felt like shit. That sack guy immediately flags me over and starts grilling me over my visa/travel history etc. He picked up that I had resigned from my job and formed the opinion that I was trying to sneak back into the States, even though as an Australian passport holder I can come into and out of the States pretty much at will. He made me miss my plane and took me into one of the little rooms. With the world's biggest shit-eating grin he told me I was not going to be allowed back into the States. I tried to reason with him, explaining all my housing stuff, bank accounts etc. were there, and that all my paperwork was in order etc. But he was a complete bastard and was having none of it. So I casually dropped my fiance's name and her position. He got a little worried. He asked me for some details about her, which I gave. He walked out of the room, his shit-eating grin definitely gone. He came back with a folder of photos and asked me to pick her out, as they keep on file photos of diplomatic personnel etc. When I passed all his tests he turned white. For once in my life I had the power over this little sheet bird, and it would not have been a hard thing to place a call to my girlfriend and have this prick's job, and he knew it. All my documentation was in order, and he was just being a first-class cunt. Managers were called, apologies were made, tickets to the first-class waiting lounge were arranged, and new flights were booked free of charge. My one and only time in this world where some dude looked at me and realized that they had just majorly faked up. So a friend of mine, let's call him Eric, he looks just like a normal guy. He is very soft-spoken and usually very kind. He can take a joke on his expense and laugh along with everyone. However, Eric used to be a fighter. He used to get into fights all the faking time, and when he fights to win by whatever means he has. So me and some friends were out drinking, and Eric was with us. We sat down next to some other guys and we just talked and laughed and had a merry time. Then one guy in the other party was irritated at Eric because he didn't rise to any sort of challenge. All verbal jibes Eric just laughed at and returned in good manner, so to speak points. So this other guy got more and more irritated at Eric over time, and this other guy was pretty big but not huge or anything, maybe 6 foot tall, and looked to be fit. Eric is 5'8" or so and just looks like a normal guy. So this other guy started to really abuse Eric verbally, and Eric just asked him to stop because it wasn't funny and it ruined the mood in general. This made the other guy even more angry, so he got up and into Eric's face saying something like, "You're such a pussy, you would never dare to get into a fight," and Eric, still sitting down, just grabbed him, tripped him and forced him down to the floor, where he just controlled the other guy, who was more or less helpless. Both Eric and the other guy got thrown out. Of course, the other guy didn't have the sense to understand he had been beaten, so maybe 20 steps outside he tries to sucker punch Eric. He hits Eric in the face and Eric got really mad, so he just beat the other guy into a quivering mess on the street. Broken nose and maybe a tooth or two got knocked out for the other guy. Eric maybe a sore cheek. Apologies in advance for any grammar mistakes and the length of the story. One night, during my junior year of high school, some of my buddies came by and asked if I wanted to go to a party with them. I didn't know the person throwing the party, but I said fuck it and went with them. It turned out to be one of the most surreal nights of my life. We got there and only knew a handful of people out of the 50 or so people that were there. There were a lot of people from different schools, so I knew that eventually something was going to happen. Soon after, one kid, we'll call him Ron, pulls out a gun and starts bragging about how his parents bought it for him and no one should fuck with him. Then, he started pointing it at people to show off the laser sight on it. The guy throwing the party, we'll call him John, saw this and told him to stop pointing the gun at people. Ron said something like, "Fuck off. Don't tell me what to do. I do what I want." It got a little more heated, but then it all seemed to get worked out, and Ron put his gun away. About 5 minutes later, Ron had the gun out again, and, trying to be slick and prove his badassery, pointed it right at John's back. When he did, John just happened to turn and look at Ron and saw the gun pointed at him. I don't remember his exact words, but John said something to the effect of, "Oh, you want to fuck with me? I'll be right back." He started jogging to the house. We were in the front yard, and I told my friends, "We need to leave. This shit is about to get crazy." While John was jogging to the house, and while he was inside, Ron seemed at first confident, but then he realized he had gotten himself in a terrible situation, and started to walk quickly to his car. John was not far behind, however, and now he had a shotgun. Ron got to his car and got in, but he was blocked in and couldn't move. John walked up to the car and tapped on the window. Ron cracked the window about an inch and was crying, probably begging for his life, while John calmly talked to him. I couldn't hear what was said, but I did hear John finally say, "Stop crying. You look like a beach." He started to walk away, but then, all of a sudden, he stopped, turned around, and shot Ron in the face with the shotgun from about 8 to 10 feet. We all thought for sure that we had just witnessed a murder and scattered like roaches when you turned the light on. I remember looking back and seeing John calmly walking back into the house while everyone was running around him. That was what freaked me out the most. His calmness. Turns out Ron lived, and John was charged with attempted murder and a few other things. Ron had reconstructive surgery to repair some of the damage, but he was badly disfigured. I don't remember if John was found guilty or not, but I do remember hearing that Ron won a settlement from John's family. He bought a new Cadillac and whatever else he wanted, but he was super depressed about his disfigured face and got hammered constantly. He died in a single car, drunk driving accident not too long after. I will never forget that night. Edit. Typo. Was covering a hockey game as a sports reporter when I saw the single best retaliation of my life. In my state, if you're female and you want to play hockey with the boys, you can. Typically, the serious girl hockey players will play in these leagues, because the girls only hockey leagues are sheet point. There was this girl named Alex who I covered, since she was a freshman, and she was really good. Played since she was a kid, was on some really good travel teams, competed in national camps, got a college scholarship for the sport, and played 4 years in college, etc. Anyway, her junior year, I'm covering an away game at this shitty arena and her school is playing one of its rivals, so I know it's going to be a chippy game. It did not disappoint. This big tough boy notices she's a girl, or played against her before, and spends the first 2 periods basically trying to intimidate her, by checking her hard into the boards whenever she has the puck, and generally doing all the things you know someone is doing to antagonize you. Now, I've seen this girl play, and I know she isn't going to tolerate that, so I just wait for the moment she snaps. It comes in the 3rd period. Pointer's hole, comes running full speed from one side of the ice to the other, and gives her one of the worst cheap shot checks I've ever seen. She hits the boards hard, lands on the ice and the crowd yells, because the refs either didn't see it, or didn't care, and the play breaks the other way so everyone else is moving away from them. She doesn't miss a beat though. Calmly, I watch her pick herself up, and his whole hockey player must have said something to cause her to snap, because she takes her helmet off, and goes his way. At this point, I can tell her thinks he's going to dismiss this sweet little girl, and tell her to play with dolls or something, but he never gets the chance. She cold corks him right in the jaw and starts beating the piss out of him. It was absolutely amazing. He must have had maybe 50 pounds on her, but she didn't care, and she beat his as handily. And because the refs were on the other side of the ice, it took a little bit of time to break them up. She got ejected. He got ejected, but he sulked out of the arena knowing full well he got his ass kicked by a girl. It was phenomenal. Actually, it was someone doing it to me. I was in my late 20s, and at a late night poker game with some friends. Lots of drinking going on. I have always been a big guy, at the time around 250 lbs. I had some fat, but I worked outdoors, and was very strong. I was also a basically easygoing guy who avoided trouble, did not start trouble, and if I could walk away from trouble, I did. There was a guy at the poker game about 10 years or so older than most of us, claimed to be a Vietnam vet, might have been, might not have been, but in the 1980s, there were more guys in bars who claimed to be than were ever there, and as he drank, he became a bit of an asshole and a lot of it was directed at me. I was brushing it off, trying to have a good time. It was a low stakes poker game for fun and seeing friends. I got up to go take a leak, and just as I was walking in the door to the bathroom, the guy runs and tries to push me, and saying I had to let him go first. I just laughed and kind of moved him and walked to the commode, unzipped and started my business. He yelled out, "I'm going to piss on your back," and walked up behind me and poured liquid down my back. Did I mention we had been drinking? And to this day, I don't know what he thought he was going to do to me. Not only did I outweigh him by 70 pounds and know how to use it, I also had longer arms than he did. I spun and grabbed the poor guy, pulled him to me, and headbutted him in the face, then held him with one arm while I open hand slapped him, backing him up to a balcony, then lifted him over the balcony holding out in the air by the shirt. Our buddies got to us and got him and got me away. That's the only time in my adult life I ever did anything like that to someone. I was drunk enough to believe he had actually pissed on me, and no one is going to do that to me. I was always a big enough guy, most people left me alone. This guy was just unfortunate enough to do the exact wrong thing. When I was 10, a friend of mine decided to bully me one day after school. For the record, we are both female. This chick spent a good 10 minutes bullying me verbally and was goading me into fighting her. Again, this was someone who said she was my friend. We lived around the corner from each other and spent the night at each other's houses multiple times over the prior 18 months or so. Finally I'd had enough and I punched her. I tried to hit her in the eye, but I hooked my fist too much and I got her in the temple. She fell like a sack of rocks. Then she yelled, "You beach." I turned and ran. Big mistake. I was a slow runner, asthma, and she was very fast. She ended up tackling me about 150 feet away, and we rolled around on the ground punching each other as hard as we could. The playground lady had to break us up. Neither of us got into trouble for it. I wish I could say she never bothered me again, but despite landing that first awesome punch, I totally lost that fight. A couple years later in junior high she tried to do the same thing twice more. The first time we got into another fist fight after school, which I was in the process of losing, when a lady pulled her car over and broke us apart. The next time was at lunchtime at school and I refused to hit her because I was just going to lose yet another fight. Instead, I went to a school counselor who had a talk with her about what the fuck her problem with me was. Not only did I never find out, but she also jumped me after school on the last day before spring break. Kicked my ass big time. After that third fight, my dad found out and drove over to her house. She'd since moved about a mile away, so no longer literally around the corner, and told her dad that if she or any of her friends ever touched me again, he'd call the cops on her. Pretty sure that bitch got her ass beat by her dad because she never bothered me again. I never found out what made her decide one random day to hate me. It was like a switch had flipped in her brain. One minute we were good friends, the next we were mortal enemies. A buddy of mine, normally quite calm, had an accident. Driving on the highway nearing rush hour, with lots of congestion. There was one of those weavers. You know the type, the driver that changes lanes constantly and goes at stupid speeds, hitting a bit of a clearing. This driver zooms past my friend and then cuts him off badly. As I said, my friend is calm, so just shakes his head, exclaiming, "Asshole." But then this driver cuts in front of another car. This car had one of those baby onboard stickers in the back window. The abrupt lane changing weaver caused the car with the baby to swerve in and out of the emergency lane. Luckily they got control back. My friend passes the car and sees a young gal, prob early 20s, and the baby in the back. The way he explained it, my friend's vision got red. He pressed on the gas and caught up to the weaver, following him for a short period. The weaver got off at an exit and eventually stopped at a gym. Getting out of his car, he goes to the back to get his gym bag. My friend then got out of his car, walked over to the guy, and told him he nearly caused an accident of a mom and her baby. This guy looks at my friend and flips him off and starts walking towards the gym. Now my friend is 6'2" and does MMA. Oddly enough, fighter friends are way calmer than anyone else I know. Prob due to getting their aggression out on a daily basis. Anyways, my friend walks up to the guy, reaches both hands out, and grabs the guy's forehead from behind. Then pulls back hard. The guy falls backwards onto the asphalt. My friend then proceeds to kick him viciously, likely breaking the guy's ribs, but luckily my buddy stopped before he killed the guy. My friend then left the guy bleeding there, got in his car, and went about his day. But listened to the local news all day, afraid that he did kill the guy, and it would be on the news. That evening he seemed anxious, and when I noticed he told me what happened. It never was in the news. Just hope that weaver will think about his ribs before gets on the highway the rest of his life. In a way, I was the person you shouldn't have faked with, though not because I was in any way a threat to him. I was working as the self-checkout attendant at a grocery store. To give you an idea of how non-threatening I'm to most people, I'm 5 feet 4.5 inches and weigh 130 pounds. Customer was trying to use a manufacturer coupon, and it wasn't working. I looked at it and discovered that the reason it wasn't working was because the coupon had expired over 6 months earlier. I explained this, and the guy started getting angry, demanding that I take the coupon. He was very upset by the idea of not saving 50 cents. I explained multiple times that the coupon was expired, that it was expired by over half a year, and there was simply nothing I could do. It wasn't valid anymore. I couldn't take it. Dude got irate and started yelling at me, ending his tirade by calling me a vapid cunt. Seriously, since when is it okay to say things like that to another person over 50 freaking cents? That was when he discovered that he'd faked with the wrong person. Not because I did, or even could do anything to him. The most I could have done was refuse him service and tell him to go to a different register. No, the reason he had faked with the wrong person was because, unbeknownst to me or the asshole customer, my older brother was standing in earshot. My 6 feet 2 inches, broad-shouldered, Heavily muscled after having just spent a summer working as a wildland firefighter. Highly protective older brother. My brother seemed to materialize out of thin air behind the customer, clapped a hand on his shoulder, spun him around, leaned down to get at eye level with him. The customer wasn't much taller than I was, and growled, "What did you just say to my little sister?" Right into his face point. The dude went white and ran out of the store, left behind all his stuff. I literally laughed until I cried. Yay. I have a story. I was stationed at Feet Drum, New York, upstate New York, just south of Canada for those that don't want to look it up, and went to a local bar where fights regularly broke out, called Willer's in Watertown, New York. If you're from the area, you'll know it. So I'm there with the very Irish father of my receptionist. Don't wanna give too many details for doxing purposes, and her fiance. A couple, and by couple, I mean 5 guys, start feeling their oats and decide a fight is to be had. Fiance dude, myself, and father of receptionist figure, what the hell, and step out of the bar for a spirited brouhaha, and the smacking commences. I trade punches with one guy, fiance passes punches with another, and after exhausting ourselves, the 4 of us sit down to have a beer. While we watch, her 68-year-old father lay waste to the other 3 guys. I mean, it wasn't even fair. This old burly dude just pummeled them into the ground like he was casually making butter. Their hits on him didn't even cause him to flinch, while he took on 3 army guys and smacked them around while smiling. The 3 of them kept trying but just kept getting the sheet knocked out of them. After about 8 to 10 minutes of their abuse, they all laid on the ground, and this guy went into the bar, bought 4 beers, carried 2 out in each hand, then handed 1 to each of them. He took a swig with them and said, "That was fun. I'm getting old. That took longer than usual," and sat down with this moral: "To date, I will never screw with old Irish men."